He carried silence the way other fighters carried scars. Joe Frazier didn't talk much, didn't complain, didn't chase applause, but inside him lived memories that never cooled, moments that stayed sharp long after the bright lights faded. He once said that a fighter doesn't just walk away from the ring, he carries the ring with him. Every sound, every wound, every man who tested his soul. And for Frazier, those memories were heavier than any championship belt he ever held. From the cotton fields of South Carolina to the roar of Madison Square Garden, he fought with a kind of stubborn fire. It was not elegance, it was not speed, it was something deeper, something forged in hardship. But the truth behind that fire was simple. Some men had carved their names into him long before the world saw him raise his gloves. Some men stayed with him long after the cheering stopped. 5, in particular. One of them wounded him with words sharper than punches. One of them broke him in a way the world never fully understood. One of them frightened him before fame ever arrived. One of them taught him what loyalty and betrayal really feel like. And one of them showed him a heart so tough that Frazier spoke about it until his final days. These were not just opponents. They were turning points, not just rivals. They were shadows that followed him through every training camp, every long night, every silent moment when he replayed the past in his mind. Who were these men? Why did their names stay alive inside him long after the belts, the trophies, and the crowds disappeared? And what did they reveal about the man behind the left hook that shook the world? Tonight, we go back into the fire, into the bruises he never confessed, into the memories he never escaped. The 5 men Joe Frazier never forgot. Joe Frazier's story was never built on glamour. It was built on sweat, repetition, and a kind of stubborn faith that refused to break. Born into poverty in the Deep South, he worked the fields before he ever stepped into a ring. He learned to carry weight on his shoulders long before he learned to throw a punch. That early hardship shaped the rhythm of his life. Straightforward, relentless, no shortcuts. By the time he reached the 1964 Olympic Games, the world saw only the gold medal. They didn't see the nights he trained alone in a slaughterhouse gym in Philadelphia, punching until his arms shook. They didn't see the fear he hid, the hunger he carried, or the dreams he never told anyone. That gold medal was more than a victory. It was a promise that he belonged among giants. When he entered the heavyweight division, boxing was at its peak. Names like Sonny Liston, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, and Floyd Patterson surrounded him. It was the most dangerous era the sport had ever seen, and yet Frazier didn't flinch. He pushed forward with a left hook that felt like a hammer and a pace that broke the will of men who thought they were unbeatable. But success came with a cost. Fame magnified every rivalry, every insult, every betrayal. Frazier carried them all. Behind the titles, the fight of the century, and the wars in Manila, he remained a man shaped not only by triumphs, but by the people who scarred him, challenged him, inspired him, and changed him. Those 5 men became landmarks in his memory, each one revealing something about who he was, what he feared, and what he refused to forgive. Number 5, Jerry Quarry. Jerry Quarry was the kind of fighter Joe Frazier never forgot, not because of hatred or betrayal, but because of something far rarer in the heavyweight division: heart. Pure, reckless, beautiful heart. Frazier used to say that when Quarry stepped into the ring, he fought like a man trying to outrun his own fate. And for one unforgettable night in 1970, their fates collided under the lights of Madison Square Garden. They had met before as contenders, but this night was different. The Garden carried a strange electricity, like the building already knew what was coming. Quarry had the look of a man who refused to lose, his eyes calm, his jaw set, his chest rising with controlled fire. Frazier saw it and understood immediately. This would not be easy. This would not be gentle. This would be a war. When the bell rang, Quarry charged forward with that fierce blend of speed and defiance that made him beloved. Frazier could hear his breath, sharp and disciplined, each exhale cutting the air like a blade. Quarry's punches landed with a kind of stubborn pride. He refused to back up. He refused to fold. It was as if the world had doubted him so many times that he decided this night would be different, no matter the cost. At one point in the second round, Quarry whispered to him through clenched teeth, "You're not walking through me tonight, Joe." It was not trash talk. It was a vow. And for a moment, Frazier believed him. But Frazier was built from something equally hard. He pressed forward, step by step, each movement carving pressure into Quarry's ribs and shoulders. The inside exchanges were brutal. Sweat flew like sparks off steel. Their foreheads scraped, their breaths collided. The crowd felt the violence rising with every exchange. By the third round, the fight turned. Frazier's bodywork began to break Quarry down. Not his heart, never that, but his ability to withstand the storm. Quarry kept punching, kept answering, kept firing back with a courage that bordered on self-destruction. Frazier would later say that Quarry's spirit scared him more than the punches of bigger men, because no matter how hard he hit him, Quarry refused to stop being Jerry Quarry. When the referee finally stepped in to stop the fight, Quarry didn't fall. He didn't collapse. He simply stood there, blinking through blood, refusing to accept that his body had betrayed the heart inside it. Frazier walked over and held him by the shoulders. There were no words. There didn't need to be. Years later, long after both men had retired, long after the crowds and the belts had disappeared, Frazier still spoke about Quarry with a kind of reverence. He said that Quarry fought with the courage of a man who knew the world had never given him enough, so he decided to take respect with his own two hands. Frazier admired that. He understood that, even near the end of his life, when someone asked him to name the toughest men he ever faced, Frazier would pause before mentioning the giants like George Foreman or the ghosts like Sonny Liston. He would start with Jerry Quarry, because some fighters leave bruises, some fighters leave scars, but a few leave something deeper, a memory that refuses to fade. And Jerry Quarry was one of them. Number 4, Jimmy Ellis. Jimmy Ellis was the kind of man who stayed in Joe Frazier's memory for reasons that had nothing to do with hatred and everything to do with history, loyalty, and the strange way friendship can be reshaped by the ring. Long before the world saw them touch gloves for the undisputed heavyweight title in 1970, they were two hungry young men in the same gym, chasing the same future, sweating on the same worn-out canvas in Louisville and later in Philadelphia. Ellis was quiet, polite, deceptively calm, and yet there was a steel inside him that Frazier recognized instantly. They respected each other because they understood each other. Both came from hard beginnings. Both knew that boxing was not a dream but an escape. In those early days, Frazier remembered Ellis as the man who never complained and never raised his voice. He moved like he was solving a problem, not fighting an opponent. When he jabbed, he did it with the precision of a man writing something carefully in the air. But time does what time always does. It separated them. It carried one upward, pushed the other sideways, and eventually placed them on a collision course for the most important night of both their careers. When Ellis won the WBA title, the world called him champion. But Frazier, holding the other half of the crown, knew that one of them would have to break the other to decide who truly belonged at the top. The build-up to their fight was awkward in a way only fighters understand. Two men who once shared encouragement now shared silence. Two men who once wrapped their hands side by side would now bruise each other for legacy. Frazier hated that feeling. Ellis admitted in later interviews that he hated it too. Still, they walked forward because pride does not care about comfort. When the bell rang in Madison Square Garden, Ellis surprised Frazier with speed he had not shown since his earliest days. His jabs snapped like stones hitting glass. His footwork carved circles around the canvas. For a moment, Frazier saw the young man he once trained with, the one who challenged him without saying a word. But fights are not memories, they are decisions. Pressure is a language Frazier spoke fluently. Step by step, he closed the ring, forcing Ellis into tighter spaces, cutting off his escape routes. Ellis hit him cleanly, but Frazier absorbed it, carrying forward with that relentless rhythm that had shaped his entire identity. In the fourth round, after a series of crushing left hooks, Ellis slumped in the corner, his body refusing to rise. The referee waved it off. Frazier did not celebrate. He simply walked to Ellis, knelt beside him, and whispered, "You fought like a champion, Jimmy." Ellis looked up, eyes glazed but steady, and replied, "You earned it, Joe." That exchange stayed with Frazier for decades. Their friendship, strained by the fight, eventually healed. They shared interviews, laughed about old times, and spoke about each other with a kind of gentle honesty rare in boxing. Ellis was never just an opponent. He was a chapter of Frazier's life, a reminder of the journey, a reminder that even in a brutal sport, respect can outlive the sound of the bell. Some men Frazier remembered because they hurt him, some because they scared him, but Ellis stayed in his memory because he mattered. Number 3, Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was the kind of presence a young fighter never forgets. Joe Frazier did not need to face him in the ring to feel the weight of his shadow. Long before Frazier became a world champion, back when he was just a hungry kid learning how to survive in Philadelphia gyms, Liston was already a myth, a dark legend, a man whose reputation walked into a room before he did. Frazier remembered the first time he saw Liston up close. The gym went silent the moment Liston pushed the door open. His shoulders looked carved from stone. His eyes held a coldness that could cut through air. Even men who liked to brag suddenly stopped talking. There was no smile, no warmth, only a slow, measured walk toward the ring, and the quiet understanding that anyone who stepped too close was gambling with fate. Frazier was still an amateur then, but he watched Liston train with an intensity that unsettled him. Every punch was thrown like it carried a message. Every movement was controlled, almost cruel. Coaches whispered warnings, old fighters gave wide space, and young prospects lowered their gazes. Frazier absorbed it all, not with fear that makes a man run, but with the kind of fear that stays inside and never leaves. In those days, sparring sessions in Philadelphia gyms could be brutal. Liston was the storm every fighter prayed they would not be asked to enter. Frazier once recalled looking at Liston's gloves and thinking they seemed too small for the damage they caused. He remembered the sound of Liston hitting the heavy bag, not a thud, a crack, as if the leather itself feared him. There was one moment burned into Frazier's memory like a flash of lightning. He was finishing a round on the bag when he felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw Liston standing there, arms folded, expression unreadable. Liston nodded once, slowly, no words. No smile, just a nod. Frazier felt his entire body tense, unsure if it was approval or warning. Years later, he still talked about that moment. Sonny didn't need to speak, he said. His silence spoke loud enough. By the time Frazier reached the top of the heavyweight division, Liston was nearing the end of his career. They never fought, and maybe that was fate protecting both of them. But the idea of Liston lingered. The image of those massive arms, the blank stare, the quiet menace. Liston represented something deeper than rivalry. He was the reminder that before you become a champion, you must survive the world that builds champions. Even decades after Liston's death, reporters would ask Frazier whether he ever wished they had met in the ring. Frazier always hesitated before answering. Then he would simply say he was a dangerous man, dangerous in ways people today don't understand. Some memories are carved by punches, others are carved by presence. Sonny Liston was the latter, a shadow that followed Frazier into greatness, a man he never forgot. Number 2, George Foreman. George Foreman was the man Joe Frazier never escaped, not because of hatred, not because of rivalry, but because of the kind of fear only a fighter understands. A fear born not from imagination, but from impact. From the memory of hitting a wall and realizing the wall hits back harder. When Frazier talked about Foreman, his voice always carried a weight. Not bitterness, not excuses, just truth. He once said, "Some men punch." George shook the earth. And on that January night in 1973, the earth moved beneath Joe Frazier in a way it never had before. The buildup was respectful. Foreman was younger, bigger, quieter, a man who looked like he had been built rather than born. He carried himself with a calm that made people uneasy. He did not brag. He did not threaten. He simply stared, slow and steady, as if measuring something only he could see. Frazier felt it. Behind Foreman's silence was danger. When the bell rang in Kingston, Jamaica, the air felt thick. Foreman stepped forward without hesitation, his eyes locked on Frazier's center line. There was no warm-up round, no testing distance. The first clean punch Foreman landed was an uppercut that lifted Frazier's feet off the ground. In the split second of weightlessness, Frazier said the world felt strangely quiet, like everything had slowed to a single heartbeat. Then he hit the canvas. He got up. Of course he did. Getting up was who he was. But Foreman followed with a kind of force that made even veteran commentators whisper in disbelief. Frazier remembered the sound of Foreman's punches more than the impact. A deep, hollow sound, like someone slamming a sledgehammer into wet earth. In total, Frazier went down 6 times. But what haunted him wasn't the knockdowns. It was the expression on Foreman's face. Calm, focused, almost apologetic, as if the destruction was simply his job, not his anger. Years later, when a journalist asked Foreman what he remembered most, Foreman answered, "Joe kept getting up. That scared me." That line softened something inside Frazier. It was respect, acknowledging respect, even if delivered through violence. Their rematch in 1976 brought the same story. New setting, same storm. Frazier had improved. He came in sharper, lighter, hungrier. But Foreman was still Foreman, still the man with heavy hands and a quiet spirit. Another knockout, another mark carved into memory. Yet with time, their relationship changed. As older men, Frazier and Foreman developed a friendship built on honesty. Foreman often praised Frazier's courage. Frazier complimented Foreman's transformation from feared champion to beloved preacher. They laughed in interviews, shared stories about the past, and spoke about each other with surprising warmth. But the truth remained. Foreman was the one opponent who left a permanent echo inside Joe Frazier. Not just physical, psychological, the kind of echo a fighter hears long after retirement, the kind that returns on quiet nights. Some men test your skill, some test your pride, but George Foreman tested Joe Frazier's limits, and that is why Frazier never forgot him. Number 1, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was not just the man Joe Frazier never forgot. He was the wound that never fully healed, the name that echoed long after applause died, the rivalry that defined them both, not with one moment, but with a lifetime of words, punches, pride, and damage neither man could undo. When they first met, there was no hate, no bitterness, just two young men climbing the same mountain. Frazier admired Ali's confidence. Ali respected Frazier's grit. During Ali's exile from boxing, Frazier even offered him money, spoke to politicians on his behalf, and pushed for his reinstatement. Frazier believed they were friends, brothers in a sport that rarely gave kindness. Then came the betrayal. Once Ali returned, he turned the spotlight into a weapon. He called Frazier names that cut deeper than punches. Gorilla, Uncle Tom, too ugly to be the champ. For Frazier, who had grown up fighting racism, poverty, and humiliation, those insults were not jokes. They pierced something sacred. They made him feel exposed in ways no jab ever had. The fight of the century in 1971 was more than a fight. It was a collision of two Americas, Ali, the rebel, Frazier, the working man. Under the lights of Madison Square Garden, every breath felt like history writing itself. Frazier fought with a controlled fury, driving forward, slipping shots, digging hooks into Ali's ribs like he was burying the past. In the 15th round, Frazier unleashed a left hook that dropped Ali onto his back. It was the punch of his life. The moment he proved to the world that he was not a stepping stone, but a champion carved out of steel. But Ali did not forget, and he did not forgive losing. Their rematch in 1974 brought new insults, louder mockery, harsher taunts. Frazier absorbed them silently, letting each word harden inside him. When they met again in Manila in 1975, it was no longer rivalry. It was war. The thriller in Manila broke something in both men. The heat was suffocating. The rounds felt endless. Frazier could hear Ali breathing heavily, could see sweat pouring from his face. Ali muttered during the brutal inside exchanges, "Joe, you're crazy." Frazier answered through clenched teeth, "You hit like a girl." The violence pushed both men beyond the edge. Ali later said it felt like death. Frazier's trainer finally stopped the fight before the 15th round, his eyes swollen shut, his body shaking with exhaustion. Ali collapsed on the stool, whispering that it was the closest thing to dying. And yet, the hurt did not end in Manila. Frazier carried the memory of Ali's words for decades. Even in interviews decades later, he said he went too far. But something complicated lived beneath that pain: respect, recognition, a bond forged through shared suffering. When Ali grew older and weaker, Frazier softened, slowly, reluctantly, but genuinely. He prayed for Ali. He visited him. He spoke about him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Because in the end, no one understood Joe Frazier better than Muhammad Ali, and no one understood Ali better than Frazier. They made each other. They damaged each other. They defined each other. Some men leave bruises, some leave memories, but only one became the shadow Joe Frazier could never escape. Muhammad Ali was that shadow, the man he never forgot. In the end, Joe Frazier's life was not defined by the belts he won or the battles he survived. It was defined by the weight he carried with him when no one was watching. Every fighter has scars, but Frazier's were different. They were quiet, private, etched far deeper than the skin. The 5 men who shaped his journey did more than trade punches with him. They revealed the truths he spent a lifetime confronting. Jerry Quarry showed him the nobility of a fighter's heart. Jimmy Ellis reminded him that loyalty can become collateral damage in pursuit of a dream. Sonny Liston embodied the fear every fighter must conquer before he conquers anything else. George Foreman forced him to face something more brutal than defeat, the realization that even the strongest warriors have limits. And Muhammad Ali reflected the complicated line between admiration and hurt, a line that defined both their legacies. When people remember Frazier, they often recall the left hook, the forward march, the relentless will. But behind all that stood a man shaped by the people he encountered. Their echoes followed him through triumph, through bitterness, through forgiveness, and finally, through reflection. In his final years, Frazier said that a fighter never truly leaves the ring. Pieces of every opponent remain inside him: pain, respect, anger, lessons. They become the quiet companions of a warrior's soul. And perhaps that is the secret of Joe Frazier's legacy. Not the titles, not the famous nights, but the truth that greatness is carved not by one man alone, but by the 5 unforgettable shadows he carried with him forever.